using the opportunity of reducing carbon use to make our cities more livable, to make them more human scale. Again, some of the lessons we've had in the last year when humans walking and cycling and playing in the streets took over from the cars. And we have three brilliantly placed people to help us. Thomas Heatherwick makes things, designs things, builds things. We got him guest editing an issue of Wired back in the day, and I got the best ever thank you note, which was one of his spun chairs, which he wrote in silver ink underneath. Thomas, you may have seen, recently completed an acclaimed new kind of park in New York on the Hudson side. It's called Little Island. It's about 2.5 acres and 132 large tulip structures holding it together. And Thomas thinks a lot about how to make things for sustainability and human scale. We can talk about your concept electric park in a minute. Emily also thinks quite a lot about mobility. So Emily Brock co-founded a company called Beryl, which started making a magical kind of bike light, but then moved into lots of localities running bicycle and scooter services. And she's now helping other people build companies, investing in purpose-driven founders at a new fund called Revent. And we can talk a little bit about what you've learned in mobility. And this is Mauro from Emitwise. Now, Mauro is using data analytics to help people empower themselves with knowledge of what their carbon use is and helping them cut that footprint using smart data sourcing. And Mauro is in a ClimateTech community and kind of convening at Voyages with a couple hundred people trying to help each other out. I'm going to start with Thomas because you're really busy. You're involved in projects in China. You build shopping centres and airports. You have helped turn some derelict land behind King's Cross into Coal Drops Yard. You think a lot about the human experience going through the city, but you also think a lot about materials and how to make a place as efficient in the use of energy as possible. How can we bring nature back into the city, make a city more human-friendly at the same time as meeting all the goals that the government is setting for infrastructure buildings?
The first thing to say is it's amazing to be speaking in this room, where Humphrey Davy was demonstrating developing electrolysis, and where normally everyone should have goggles on. And really, we should probably all have goggles on. Anyway, no. I think that we've been very struck by this really intractable about you can't quantify human emotion and human experience. You come up with great data very easily on that dimension, but when you look at the construction industry having sort of 6 times the carbon impact that the aviation industry has, and how little we're able to really talk about places that, it sounds stupid and sentimental, but knocking buildings down because nobody loves them is ludicrously expensive. And the last century has been a massive catastrophe of placemaking. It's astonishing how bad, when you think of the amazing progress in so many other things, but new pieces of city are generally disastrously bad because so how to make buildings and places that people will care enough to then not knock down, but instead adapt and adjust and want to work with, and they're flexible enough. So in the different projects we're working on, I suppose we're trying to see architecture and design from a slightly different mindset, which the architecture and design world got into its head somehow that the people were wrong, and that it was very cerebral and intellectualized as it sort of separated and professionalized itself, and sort of stopped thinking from the user point of view, it seems to me. And that gap of feeling your job is to really serve people, and that not to think that they're wrong if they don't engage with something. And so we are interested in the functionalist movement that the Bauhaus was pushing, and we see ourselves as functionalists, but it feels that we forgot that emotion was a function. And so people, I have all so many times, and as a designer, you probably had this where people go, yeah, that's the function. And then we'll talk about aesthetics, like that's this separate thing. And it belittles an essential thing, which is that emotion is a part of that. And you can, it's not how something looks, it's the whole experience of something that will make it really matter, and you not then demolish it. So we're doing a lot of our focuses on how do you not knock things down, but use them, even if they're not the most gorgeous structure. How do we still just work with it? We places the modern mindset wanted to tidy things up and make everything clean, which when it's an iPhone, that's logical. It's great to simplify it, but with place, we like complexity and unexpected idiosyncrasy. But designers don't like to do that. They tidy everything up too much at a big city scale. So I think we're seeing this just big gap, and the COVID crisis extra has shown that the humanizing of place, the humanizing is the key element that we can do. But I feel frustrated that building cities are so slow, and the urgency with the climate crisis is so immediate. But we can just sort of plug on with trying to make and inspire others as much as possible to make places that will engage people. So mental health is the aspect. So projects where, for example, the 1,000 Trees project in Shanghai, which is the whole building, the facade is 1,000 trees. And yes, it's going to take many tons of carbon out of the air and create oxygen and have acoustic qualities, but it's also just to have something that just isn't another bloody box, gigantic, sterile place, is actually our leading motivation. It's to try to make things little humans haven't got much bigger over the last 500,000 years, and so how do you make places that respect that human scale? There are lots of different angles, but with our Google buildings, our focus there is this thing of like you do your building and then kind of sticks and solar panels on the place. So our Google buildings in California are one gigantic photovoltaic, the entire roof like a tent. And it's slashed to let daylight in, but just the whole building is a sort of semi-rigid tent of solar panel. And we're just completing 4 of those with workspace for about 20,000 people. But the other side is here, somewhere here is John Hitchcock's, who's our client for the Olympia. So there it is, where the reusing, they knock down those courts, gigantic exhibition halls. And there's one last major exhibition hall in London, in the centre of London, which is Olympia. And so we've got the great privilege to be working with John to not knock it down, not make loads of crazy housing that's ludicrously expensive, but instead make 2.5 acres of new public space and make it work better as an exhibition hall, use all the idiosyncrasy of the layers that built up over many, many decades to make a place rather than that is about motion. And that's something that John's been interested in for years, and so we're most of our work is isn't making things sticking out of rivers and stuff like we're talking about. It's actually working out how you use what you've got and use the ingenuity that so many people have in creating places and triggers and unexpected things that you could say, oh, it's just aesthetics. But it's not, it's function, it's essential function to then hopefully not knock down.
But often there could be an extra cost in taking a sustainability-led approach using particular materials. Are you finding the developers who want you to take on a commission for a city centre, big building, a shopping centre, an office block, are increasingly willing to factor in this extra cost?
I mean, the luckily enough social pressure is huge. And now, since COVID, the emotional conversation is there. It's astonishing the quality of conversation now with, John's known this and been interested in this for years, but many developers could be lazy placemakers for a very long time, and that's exploded. And now we've got really, really interesting conversations happening. But you can word, stories are, you can get one story of zero carbon. So which zero carbon are you talking about? Zero carbon in the building once it's built, or zero carbon in the actual building of it. And it's sort of very famous building, new building in London, incredible, that talks a zero carbon talk. But when you actually look at what it took to build it, the vast amounts of concrete and all those things, we don't have common ways to talk about things, and architecture is something that the public don't really talk about. They do in the fancy museum, but and then they say, do I like a gherkin or don't I like a shard? And it's not them, it's the cynical, shitty stuff all around that quietly goes up, that didn't dare to have any personality. That's the big damage that architecture critics don't write about, because it's no fun to write about it. That's the city wreckers, in my opinion.
You're not just making buildings, you're also making all sorts of other things. And you made a new kind of car for IM Motors in China called the Aero, which is an electric car that also sucks pollution from other cars using a HEPA filter.
Sex of cars.
Cleans the air based on the pollution from other cars. What was your goal there?
Well, the phenomenal success of Tesla kind of gave a kick to all car manufacturers, and so that everyone's falling over themselves to make electric cars. We were kind of wary as to what was our role in being asked to make a new car, and we used to sort of laugh at the car departments in the colleges and universities I've been to, where everyone made everything look the same. Whether it was a lorry, a motorbike, a bus, a car, they all had this kind of look of automotive. And you just thought, what's going on there? And just thought, who cares what aesthetic, as cars have homogenised more and more. So we tried to think, what's the idea that can happen? And the sort of smug driving around in an electric car thinking, I'm not engine, thought, well, can it do something more than that? And the battery technology now promising the potential to not have to charge once a day, but potentially once a week, means that you can maybe take a tiny bit of power, and the fact that there will potentially be 1 million of our car moving around in a loss of urban and context. So, well, what if this could, we've all been doing a lot of inhaling and exhaling with different kinds of filters. Could we combine these mobile units with extraction? There's been some tests already with buses, where there are a few buses in the UK that have this air cleaner to take up the particulate matter. They take out approximately 3 tennis balls worth of stuff that would otherwise be going into us and our children's lungs. And so the potential that each car could take 1 tennis ball of stuff out of the air every year, just a cumulative thing, 1 million of those means something. So it was exciting. That was one side of it. The other side was that there's a space crisis. So many of us, and so many people have not had spaces for their lives. And even ones of us who thought we had a pretty fancy place to live, suddenly the COVID crisis kicked in, and then you're in your bedroom trying to do something, trying to pretend you're not in your bedroom. And then when you think about stereo systems and how often people's best stereo is in the car, and their most comfortable chair that they own is the car chair. And so thought, what if the room? And well, most cars are only used 10% of the time and sit there doing nothing the rest of the time. So we got interested in the other bit of the time. So the seats turn around like an airline business class seat that can
eat, work, rest. What if they
hold that thought, Emily?
Yeah.
Is the electric car with whatever beds and bowling alleys and everything else you can put in, is the electric car the future, the solution for our city centres? You worked in mobility for a decade.
Making me be provocative. Yeah, so the mobility hat on, I mean, if you're talking about decarbonising cities and making them more livable, nothing does that better than active travel. And by that I mean getting people out of tons of metal that are polluting and onto making the city so where you can walk and you can cycle. And if it was to be provocative on electric cars, I mean, these are very different. They're actually taking tennis balls of crap out the air. But an electric car otherwise, I mean, it potentially decreases a bit of pollution, but it does add to congestion, which obviously does increase pollution. But otherwise, they require space. And to your point, we have a space crisis. Cars take up 80% of the space, but are used 30% of the time, for 30% of the journeys. And they require kind of oceans and great big arteries of concrete through communities. They don't make cities more livable, making them more walkable and accessible. Transport's an amazing way of kind of an equalizer for social and racial equality. Cities need to move to be successful, and they need to be accessible by everybody. So electric cars are cool, but they also don't help the equality gap when it comes to transport. And innovations like getting your loo roll delivered to your door in 15 seconds is all very cool, but it's actually not really improving the social fabric of a city and making it more livable.
But a shiny car has long been a signal of somebody's status and their wealth. And it's going to be very hard to persuade quite a lot of people that they should not own a car. How are you going to change that expectation?
Well, it's a practical issue. I mean, we feel it every day. The cities aren't big enough. We haven't enough space for everybody living in a city to be able to move around in their own car. A car transports on average 1.6 people. It's not incredibly inefficient, and it's polluting and it's dangerous. There has to be kind of, unfortunately, often some demand side measures to make it more difficult to drive a car. So these changes to make cities more livable and to decarbonise don't have to be crazy expensive. They haven't got to be using a lot of innovation and technology. It can be something as simple as, so for example, we have parklets. We put in place parklets in our cities, which is you take a car parking space, so it decarbonises by making driving a little bit more expensive and a little bit more annoying. But then it also adds, to your point, adds greenery. So our parklet has some wooden decking, it has some planters, it has some seating, it has parking and charging for some micromobility solutions, and it adds so much more value than just a car parking space. It's somewhere for someone to rest, it's someone to add kind of footfall to a local shop. It literally decarbonises the city by having the green planters, and the greening is such a social and emotional addition. So little measures like that don't cost much, but it does make the city a little bit more livable.
You chose to partner with local authorities, with cities, to give people a choice how they go around the city. They can rent a bike or a scooter. And you've been doing this in the US, in the UK. What have you learned about how the attitudes of the people who make the decisions are changing? Are city planners getting more receptive than they were?
Yes, they are. Partly because they have to be. You've had this kind of wave of innovation that started off from China with the bikes, so Ofo and Mobike, these kind of very cheap bikes that flooded our streets, and then the scooters. So they sort of got overtaken by the decision was no longer theirs. these vehicles arrived and asked for permission later. And now they're catching up. And in fact, the UK has been much more regulatory than other places, and scooters still aren't legal here. There are trials happening right now, but it's been much slower, much more regulatory, which I think is a really good thing. And I think what we are moving towards is one city having one operator. So instead of a kind of free-for-all of many different coloured scooters and many different companies, very difficult to make profitable, you have one company that does the bikes, the e-bikes, the e-scooters, and we're now doing e-cargo bikes, which are super cool because they really do take away car journeys. But if you have one operator doing all of it, you can control it better, and it's profitable as well. The thing about scooters, love them or hate them, and it's a whole other conversation. People love them. They do jump on them, and they're incredible revenue generating. And if you have a multimodal mix, those scooters can actually make the other forms of transport, the active travel options, more affordable.
Last March, a lot of these big metal things disappeared from our city streets, and people reclaimed the streets.
Yep.
They started walking in the road, cycling. Local councils started creating new cycle lanes. It became a lot safer, a lot more pleasant. How do we stop, once things get back to normal, reverting to how we were before?
So it's back to the policy point. Unfortunately, it requires policy. We had a snapshot, and again, it doesn't cost money, it doesn't cost innovation or technology, but we saw when the cars in COVID were taken off our streets, as you say, people stepped into them. They walked, they cycled, they played. Children, my street were out there playing every day. It was wonderful to see. And then as the world opens up again and people need options, they need independent mobility solutions, and that can be micro-mobility solutions. And policy, which it is doing, needs to support that. So adding in bike lanes, increasing, I'm sure there's lots of car drivers in the world, in this room, and I don't hate car drivers, but the supply makes it more frustrating to have a car. All these policy interventions are the ones which really make things lasting change.
Now, if we're going to make change, Mauro, we need measurement. We need accurate data that we can work from and set targets. Explain a little bit about how EmitWise empowers people with data to change behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. For us, it's all about immediate, urgent action, right? I think that's what brings us all together. My personal point of view is we need everything. We need the most material sort of actions and changes, all sorts of active mobility and electric vehicles in tandem. One of the interesting facts is that the level of decarbonization that we saw due to the pandemic, when supply chains were completely paralyzed, nobody was driving, nobody was flying, that was the level of reductions that was required to meet the Paris Agreement. And that for me is a very daunting fact, because it took freezing the world to meet that, right? And today we're not on track for that. Today we're on track for 3 degrees. So everybody needs to, when you walk away from this room, go tell your kids, go tell the companies you work for, the companies you run, go tell everybody that the single thing they need to focus on is climate change. And for us, what we do as a company, EmitWise helps businesses in particular. We see them as our lever for change. Our customers are our sort of path for climate action. We help them understand very simply what is the single biggest thing that you can do as an organization to help the world meet the 1.5 degree sort of temperature increase trajectory. So we have we know that companies like the likes of Google, the single biggest thing that they can do is put all of their servers on renewable energy. And then next thing that they can do is ensure that all of the buildings that they build in the embodied carbon, but also their operational, when you're lighting the building on a day-to-day basis, that's also sort of green energy. So we use data, we help them understand, hey, what does your carbon footprint look like as a business, and what is the biggest thing that you can change? And I think the most encouraging thing, very briefly, to say is that the business cases are there, right? I think that's the thing, that companies, governments, they're understanding that whether you look at it from a financial risk point of view or simply because consumer pressure is driving you there, there's a dollar sign behind being green. It's just a question of where do you invest that dollar, right? So that's where we fit into this puzzle. We help organizations in particular figure out, should you invest in active mobility or in the electric vehicle that is modern and will suck the tennis balls of pollution out of the air.
So there is a sense of urgency, Mauro. We're not on track to reach 2 degrees, let alone 1.5 degrees.
Yeah.
We've heard a bit about construction's role in helping solve the problem. We've heard about transportation's role. Based on what you're seeing from the diverse businesses that are working with EmitWise, if you were talking to government people, policy people, what changes would you push them to adopt in the way we're running our cities?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we've had a bit of a privilege of being able to have some of those conversations. And what we always ask for is more accountability, more transparency in the way of, essentially the companies and institutions that make up our cities really disclosing what is the impact that they're having so that then they can be held accountable to targets. So new builds, local authorities, they all need to disclose what's their current level of performance and what are they on track to achieve. So the UK is actually a pretty big worldwide leader in demanding climate disclosure from organizations. Here, even if you're not a publicly listed company, if you reach certain thresholds, you have to say what is your carbon footprint on a year-by-year basis. That's amazing, but you only have to do that for your operational footprint. So this question of what does net zero really mean is a very important question that we ask a lot. And the other side of that you have to ask yourself is, what is the footprint of your entire value chain as an organization? As a city, it's not just the lights that you turn on, but the footprint associated with the waste that you generate, for example. And so the thing that we are asking the government to do is to demand and require that every local community, every company has to report their entire value chain carbon footprint.
So these need to be open dashboards where taxpayers, voters, citizens know exactly what's going on.
Yeah, we're looking for at least the level of transparency you see with, financial accounting that is demanded from public organizations, and for that to start trickling down across environmental disclosure as well.
And just take as one example, air quality.
Yeah.
How do we ensure that we're not breathing in fumes that are harmful to us? There have already been coroner's reports that have identified poor air quality as the cause of a young girl's death.
Yeah.
What do we need to do to make sure this stops?
Yeah, well, I think the answer boils down to two things. First of all, we need to drive less cars. That's certainly a very good start. But what pushes us to driving less cars is having genuinely scientifically based measurements and disclosures that people can trust, that have a seal of approval that say, if this level of pollution has been decreased, that's going to have a genuine impact on public health. And the science is out there. It just needs to be adopted by all of the different folks and institutions that need to be reporting on this.
Thomas, when you started work on the London bus project, how much debate was there on what kind of engine, whether it could have been electric or I think it's diesel, the main engines? How much say did you get, and do you think it would be different now?
We were brought in after the drive platform was already worked out, and so we were too late to have an impact on that.
Do you think today that commission would have been different?
We were working on human experience and trying to move the sense that only one socioeconomic slice of society uses the buses to try and push for a dignity of bus use. Because, as Emily's talking about, if you suddenly get everyone into a lovely car that's clean and put it on the street, you couldn't move. So public transport is the thing, but it's how to get that. I remember someone saying, a really good society is where rich people take public transport. And so how do you make that a really active choice? And so we focused on the dignity of the passenger. And I'd never used the word dignity because I thought it sounded so pompous before. But then you were just thinking, well, someone in their flashy, silly Ferrari or whatever going around London, compare their experience to someone sitting at the front of a double-decker bus. What you see, there's no comparison. So why? And if someone's spending 30 years spending an hour and a half on a bus every day, does that experience add to their life? Does it detract from their life, or is it meh, or as my daughter says? And so we just thought, how can this add to the culture of your life, rather than seeing culture as only happening in art museums? But I'm excited by public transport, and how you get kind of full solutions. It's also, I think public transport is incredibly important for our understanding of each other, because the rituals, the digital economy has busted apart ritual that meant you came into contact with people who weren't like you, whether that's going to a baker or something, or even rush hour, where people might get to be sitting alongside someone. But now that the rituals aren't there and the chances of meeting each other, I mean, public transport is the place where, and online, you're going to see everyone who's just like you. In your workplace, you're going to come across people who are just like you. So the social aspect, actually, so it not being a surprise when Brexit happens, and not being a surprise when Trump comes in, because you've actually got a sense of your fellow common people.
I'm looking forward to having the courage to get back on one of your London buses and seeing all sorts of people with very different political views. And maybe on the way to getting the bus, I'll take one of the Beryl bikes in whichever part of the town I can have it. And I will navigate into a place that's better managed because everybody has EmitWise's dashboards of data. Mauro, Emily, Thomas, thank you for a really lively and informative conversation.